decade, they've invaded your homes. Their little bodies dispensing frightful tales and invoking fear in the hearts of men. Every sunrise and every sunset, they appear again and again, ready to wreak more havoc.
Hang on to your side piece, baby! It's gonna be big! Very big! I don't think this is such a good idea, guys!
The Rugrats Movie.
About time someone make me into a movie star!
A motion picture for anyone who ever wore diapers.
Of course, I don't really need to tell you who the Rugrats are. I think no matter what age you are, you have a good idea of who they are. But this was the big feature film debut for them. And this is a story where you have Tommy facing responsibilities with a new baby brother being born, and Dill. As with all newborns, the child becomes a bane to Tommy and the rest of the gang, as well as Tommy's parents, honestly. Even Phil and Lil don't get along with him, so they decide to return Dill where he came from, the hospital. But they end up getting lost, really lost, and getting into an adventure where they end up in the forest. They have to deal with all the elements, including a group of monkeys in a circus, a Wolverine that's after them. And it's just a lot of crazy things happening in a big adventure. This is kind of the textbook definition of what you do for a big screen adventure. You basically take these characters outside of their environment and into this much bigger, grander adventure. And this film has a lot of notable firsts to it. It's the first animated feature from Nickelodeon. You could tell right away if you saw this in theaters, because you got a cat dog short that was pretty clearly made for theaters. Sadly, it has not been officially released on DVD or video. In fact, when the Rugrats movie came out, they actually took an episode from the Cat Dog TV show instead of actually putting the short on there, which still baffles me to this day why that has not gotten a proper release. But it was the first movie, of course, based on a Nicktoon. Even though Nickelodeon had plans to do a couple movies with 20th Century Fox for Doug, Rugrats, and Ren and Stimpy back in the 90s. And I'll talk more about that in tomorrow's Reviewing Network Live. But it was an interesting little bit of what-if history. If those films had gotten made, these movies would probably be under the Disney label right now. But most notably, among all the firsts that this movie has, another major first for this film was that it was the first non-Disney animated film to make over $100 million domestically. So that's, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs have been out in theaters for over 60 years at this point, and no other animated film outside of Disney made over $100 million until this movie did. I mean, this was back before computer animation was the norm, so DreamWorks was not the big name that it was now. You didn't have Illumination, you didn't have Blue Sky, you didn't even have Warner Brothers' current animation department that couldn't make a film that was successful at the time, but it took the Rugrats of all things, to cross $100 million. And Disney, honestly, considering the history that they've had with competition and other studios trying to do whatever it takes to make sure that people go see their movies over this animated films, they didn't really do a whole lot with this particular movie, at least not. Mostly because I think it was because they'd have a movie coming out a couple days later, which we'll get to in just a little bit. And the reason why the Rugrats movie was a success was because it came at the right time. I mean, Rugrats was still popular in the 90s. The show had just come back after a couple of years off the air. It was still a big hit for Nickelodeon, so needless to say, it was still a massive success. And like I said, as far as the movie itself goes, it follows the typical structure for a big screen adaptation like this. Have these characters go on a grander, bigger scale adventure than what they're used to, keep a lot of the charm from the original show so that people can stick with it, and the movie definitely does have that. It definitely keeps a lot of the charm and enjoyment of the original series, while even not being afraid to go for a little bit more intense scenes in here than you would think. Like, there were some moments in here that I was just kind of like, that's pretty grim, especially considering that these are babies, so they're not afraid to have this edge that they can bring into this film, and I thought they did a pretty good job with it. There are notable downsides to the film. The animation is surprisingly much bleaker than it is in the original cartoon. Like, they're trying to go for kind of more of a realistic animation style to it for these characters from the first movie. It's both kind of a negative and a positive, and for one instance, yeah, it looks much better than the TV show, but at the same time, it does feel off. And there are way too many moments and characters that have no purpose to the plot whatsoever. It's like, there's an entire pointless sequence with these circus monkeys that get lost in the woods, start attacking the babies, and they serve no purpose except to just be one of the threats they face in the movie. Kind of like the Wolverine. There's no reason for him to be in the movie except to just be a threat. Like, stuff like this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it doesn't really contribute to anything except to move the story along. But for the most part, the movie does its job pretty well. I think it's a decent feature film adaptation of the show. upping the animation style a little bit as well as the adventure aspect. Still keeps the charm of the original series in full, and it certainly isn't the best Rugrats movie, but it came out at the right time. It was a film that I think a lot of people really got invested into, myself included, because I was a big fan of the show at the time. Still am, but take it for what it is. I think you'll enjoy it for what it is. There certainly are a lot better movies from the Rugrats that we'll definitely get into in the years to come. So that's the Rugrats movie.
The Rugrats are going to Paris.
Wee, speaking French already.
They're seeing new faces,
Come on, I'll show you the shortcut.
visiting new places, and getting the biggest surprise
I'm gonna get the Barbie. Yeah, that'll be the day.
of their tiny little lives. Rugrats in Paris, the movie.
Hey, it's not ready. Wait for me. Somebody needs a nap.
Starts Friday, November 17th.
So Rugrats in Paris is, of course, the sequel to the Rugrats movie, and kind of like with the Rugrats movie, how there was an episode before setting up this movie, there was a TV movie that came out just a couple of months before this movie did, called, I think it was called Acorn Nuts and Diaper Butts, which basically was setting up a lot of what they have in this movie, where you basically have the Rugrats going to Paris and Chucky basically taking the leading role in this one, searching for a new mother, who we see the introductions to his new mother Kira and her daughter Kimmy Finster, who would later become eventual characters in the seasons to come after this. And this marks the only appearance of the two villains in the Rugrats franchise, Coco LaBouche, played by Susan Sarandon. It's basically Cruella de Vil, kind of, except instead of dogs, she hates children, including babies, and her accomplice Jean-Claude, played by John Lithgow. The first Rugrats movie was fine for what it is, a decent feature film version of the show, keeping the spirit of the series intact, upping the animation style as well as the adventure aspect, but still keeping kind of the charm of the original series. With this, I feel like it's a vast improvement over the previous film, because it seemed like the people behind this movie decided to try to give us more, not just in terms of an adventure, but more going into elements of stories that have been mentioned in the series beforehand, but never fully realized, such as the main crux of the film, in which not only the babies go to Paris, but Chucky searches for a new mother after his dad said it's time for him to get back into the dancing scene, which again, like I said, is a subplot that dates back to the original runs of the series, the Mother's Day episode, of course, and then the TV movie, which I just mentioned. I mean, in the Mother's Day episode, we basically find out that what happened to Chucky's mother and why she hasn't been seen up to this point, and Chaz decides to tell Chucky after all these years that she had a terminal illness shortly after her birth, and that's a pretty impressive thing for a show to go for, and be not afraid to tackle some pretty heavy stuff in there. And it's a very good episode. If you haven't seen the Mother's Day episode of Rugrats, definitely check that one out. And a lot of the emotional moments in Rugrats in Paris do work very nicely. There are a lot of really good quiet moments. The beautiful animation that's in this movie. Like, there's that great scene where Chucky's looking out of the airplane and the clouds show him and his mother. And it's some really nice CG animation that they put in there. Overall, the animation looks a whole lot better than the first movie does. I think it adds to a lot of the enjoyment factor of this film over the first film. The little bit of the downside that I have with this is there's the big climax. You gotta have a big climax. Of course, it's a sequel, but it's also a Rugrats sequel. So you have the kids inside this big Reptar animatronic from basically the equivalent of Euro Disneyland, Euro Reptar Land, and it runs amok all over Paris. I'm not gonna lie, it's a little too over the top, even for a kids movie. It leaves you asking so many questions, like, most notably, why the hell is there room at the top of this robot for a baby to control this giant robot around? And, like, it's creating havoc all over Paris, and it's just like, it's kids movie logic, I get it, but still, I have to ask that question about this movie. But overall, when you really look at the film in general, it is definitely a vast improvement over the previous film in terms of the better animation, better storytelling, better visuals, better music. It's just more nicely done, well put together. You can see a lot more effort being put into the final product, and it works very well. If I have to pick the best overall Rugrats film of the three films, this is definitely my choice for it. It's definitely a vast improvement over the first movie, and I recommend it. Rugrats in Paris, the movies.
When the Rugrats go overboard,
Where's your flag?
legends will meet.
Yeah, monkey. Where'd you come from?
Spike, hey, with Speed,
Could you give a dog a little warning?
and Trouble will meet her double. Rugrats Go Wild, featuring the voice of Bruce Willis as Spike.
Yeah, baby. That's what I'm talking about.
With PG. That play only in theaters.
Ah, the days when the Nickelodeon movie was promoted on a competing network and they didn't want to show the logo by any means necessary of Nickelodeon's. So I always found that kind of amusing, and even the poster that I have here on my written review actually has the Nickelodeon logo taken out of that as well. So I just find that kind of amusing. But since Rugrats and the Wild Thornberrys made the successful transition to the big screen, and it would make some sense if they had their paths crossed, Nickelodeon decided to make the third Rugrats movie a crossover film with the Wild Thornberrys, and thus we have said film. And of course, as the plot indicates, the Rugrats go on a cruise, their ship gets capsized during a storm, end up on the same island as the Wild Thornberrys, and of course the chaos and hilarity ensues from there. And with Rugrats in Paris and Wild Thornberrys being vast improvements over their TV shows, this movie in particular feels like a major step down in comparison to both shows and what both preceding movies had brought to, kind of expand the characters and stories in both of those films. But they've gone back to more of a formulative approach that's been done to death over and over again. And I'm sorry, I'll stick with the Jetsons meet the Flintstones, or When the Simpsons meets Family Guy. Thank you very much, because this is about what you would expect from a film like this. But then again, it could get by with some of the interactions between the characters having some entertainment value to them, and they do. At least some of them, even if they try to make you think some characters from one show that have the same characteristics or character traits from other shows, they just cram in it, which they just cram in here. Like, would anyone even compare Angelica to Debbie? I mean, I never made that connection before. Heck, Chucky being compared to Donnie, mostly because they have the same hair, but different color. I mean, and then when you have a movie that's being sold off by having Bruce Willis as the voice of Spike whenever Eliza's around him, it honestly works a lot better than I thought it would have been, and it would have given Willis credit for. I mean, I'm hearing the voice of John McClane coming out of Spike the Dog from the Rugrats. It's a concept that's so hilarious and stupid, and it works, again, for the most part. I mean, there are those ridiculously corny throwaway lines, like if they're trying to talk down to the audience or saying some pretty childish lines, like there's pointless references, like the last line Spike has in the movie is, "As dog is my witness, I'll never lose my babies again," and it's just like, lack of creativity there, to say the least. And also, Spike kind of takes over for Darwin pretty much as Eliza's sidekick. He's just pushed. Darwin's literally just pushed off to the side of the movie. He barely has anything to do in this film whatsoever. Like, he has 2 to 3 lines in this whole movie, and that's it. The rest of it is just him screeching. Like, they completely tossed him off to the side because Spike's right there, so just replace the monkey with the dog, I guess. And the adventure really isn't that exciting either. And that's the worst thing about this movie. We're just watching the babies just walking around the jungle, and that's it. Nothing interesting happens until we get to the third act, when we start to get into the action and adventure when you have the clouded leopard after them. And even then, there's really not a whole lot there. There's more adventure in the first 2 Rugrats movies compared to this film. And this one gets the PG rating because more adult humor, I guess. They gotta throw that in there, but, and then there's the big climax at the end, which is really, really lackluster, because it's a situation where, there's a big subplot where Nigel sees the babies at first. He falls off of a mountain, gets hit by a coconut, and he thinks he's a baby, and so that's why the Rugrats can understand him at first. And there's a situation where they get stuck inside this bathysphere, and they're trying to go for some realism here. I get it, but these are just long, drawn-out scenes where Nigel's just keeping up hope and oxygen ticking away, and it goes on for 20 minutes. And this is an 81-minute movie. I mean, this is about 1/4 of the whole movie. And halfway through it, I was just like, alright, we get it, just wrap it up already, because it was going on for so long and nothing was going on. Like, this is a film that should have had a lot more, it has a lot more ambition to it, but it just never delivers on any of it whatsoever. It's like the Hey Arnold movie from the year before. It was supposed to be a TV movie at one point, but unlike Hey Arnold, they shelved everything that they had and started from scratch, and even then, that still couldn't prevent the movie from being a gigantic letdown in the end. I mean, you could have had something exciting with these, but overall, it's a drag. And unfortunately, it just ends the Rugrats and the Wild Thornberrys movies on a bad note. And the box office wasn't really helping it either, and neither was the fact that they literally had a smell-o-vision format placed into this with Odorama. Like, you could get these cards at the movie theater, and you're supposed to scratch the cards, and you could smell like different, like there's a thing we could smell Phil's feet if you're interested. You can smell Debbie's root beer. You can, like, smell all these different things. It's just like, why do I want to smell any of that? Like, there's a reason why that format died, only to be briefly revived with Spy Kids All the Time in the World, and even then, that didn't work then either. But, Yeah, this is just a bad way to go out for both the Rugrats and the Wild Thornberrys. Plus, the zeitgeist for both of these series had kind of pretty much died off as SpongeBob pretty much took over as Nickelodeon's premier mascot as a whole. But yeah, this is just a mess. This is just a messy film on so many levels. But so that's Rugrats Go Wild.